Hi, hello. I'm filming this video in my bathroom because it's like 9 o'clock at night and I just decided that now was the time to film this video. I don't know. My kids are asleep in the other room and at any given time they may wake up and start screaming and I'll have to go. Also, I have zero plans of editing this video. I'm just gonna warn you guys now because as the title says, I have ADHD, and when confronted with the editing process, it just never happens, or I get frustrated by technology and I give up. So I'm just gonna not edit, but it's okay. Listen, I have like a million notes, so we're not gonna get derailed. We'll see. So hi everyone, my name is CaeRhae Hopkins. I am 26 years old and I was diagnosed with ADHD about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, year and a half. So I just wanted to introduce myself, talk about how I got diagnosed, because getting ADHD, adult ADHD diagnosed, especially as a woman, is very challenging, especially in the medical system we have today. So I kind of wanted to share what that process looked like, why I can't take pretty much any form of medication, and how I have kind of figured out my life and some systems to make life more doable going forward. So let's go ahead and get into it. So first I wanted to kind of give a backstory on how I was diagnosed. I was diagnosed in the spring of 2021, about 4 or 5 months after my second child was born. So motherhood hit me like a truck, like a semi. Like I just decided to walk out onto like I-95 and get run over by a Mack truck. I was not prepared in any way. My kids were both surprises and they're 10 months apart. So it was a super, honestly, traumatic life experience, to put it plainly. And it's been said that typically that is what causes an adult ADHD diagnosis, is something traumatic or very triggering to occur to make symptoms peak, and therefore you seek help. And that was definitely the situation in my case. I knew growing up that something was different. I just remember thinking that I was constantly on the outside looking in and I couldn't figure out why. I looked at myself and I was like, okay, and this is gonna sound really vain for a second, but honestly, I think lots of people with ADHD will understand this because we're very inside our own heads. We're constantly analyzing so that we can mask and portray to the world what we think they want to see, because we've basically been told our entire lives through body language or straight up verbally that we are not what the world wants. So for me, I kind of did a list. I think like late middle school, early high school, I was like, look, I'm not that bad looking. I'm pretty funny. I'm easygoing. I'm talkative. But no one really wants to be my friend. No one really wants to be around me. My teachers don't really like me. I struggle in all my classes, even though I know I'm smart. People kind of treat me like I'm lazy, stupid, like I'm an outsider, but I don't even fit with the outsiders. I was like, I couldn't figure out what was going on, but I also couldn't figure out how to verbalize to anyone that I knew something was going on, if that makes sense. And I had no educators that were around me long enough to notice that something was happening. I moved around a lot, and so I never really had consistency in my life or an adult figure who was consistent enough to recognize something was happening. Now, of course, you're gonna say parents. ADHD once upon a time was classified into two distinct categories. It was hyperactive type and inattentive. Now my understanding is that there are no subtypes. It's just some symptoms are stronger in one person, but they would still have the inattentive type, and vice versa, which I would say is true of myself. But for me, I was not hyperactive. I could be, but that was not my presenting symptoms. I was inattentive, and inattentive, especially in girls, is really hard to catch, because it could be just seen as daydreamy or spacey, or just simply you're not paying attention. And I think that that was what people perceived me as, especially because I dealt with a lot of things with humor. So if I ever felt uncomfortable, I would kind of just be silly or crack a joke, which would get me in trouble with educators, and they would just honestly kick me out of class, when really the real thing that was happening is I was really struggling with understanding things and no one was ready to help me. Sorry, circling back, my parents and I have a really special, deep relationship. I was homeschooled off and on for a lot of my life. So the only red flag they saw, because I was comfortable in my home environment, I was confident there. So I didn't exhibit a lot of the social issues that would have been a red flag at home. As far as my education, they saw that I struggled there, but I also struggled with a lot of chronic pain and health issues. So I think they thought a lot of the struggle in school was just me not feeling good, when really those not feeling good symptoms were a manifestation of social anxiety. I just didn't want to go. So that was the backstory. But the backstory is I knew something was up from a very young age. I just couldn't figure out how to say it. Then motherhood happened, and I struggled with postpartum depression very badly after both of my children were born. But it was something more than that. It was like I had figured out through trial and error and sheer dogged determination before kids how to support myself and make life happen. I knew I was doing it differently than the people around me. I knew it was harder for me than the people around me, but I refused to admit weakness or ask for help. And I just pushed forward. I just pushed myself super hard. And then when kids came into the picture, it wasn't just me that I had to take care of. So all of the systems that I had put into place and all the things I had learned through trial and error no longer worked. And if you think about it, that's 24 years of effort down the drain. So of course that is very traumatic. It's like all of a sudden I had nothing to go off of. I couldn't figure out how to be a good mom, how to take care of myself, how to take care of my partner. Everything went haywire. And thank God I lived with my parents at the time. And so my mom was a huge part in honestly keeping me alive, keeping my kids alive, making sure that everything that goes into raising a newborn was happening. So that happened. I knew something was going on. Thankfully, I had just moved nearby to my godmom, who was also, she is a speech pathologist who deals with a lot of kids with special needs, mental disorders, and learning disabilities. And she herself has some mental disabilities of her own. And since she is a more mature woman, she could look at my situation and say, there's something going on here. I had lived close to her in college, independent of my parents. That crashed and burned. It's a video for a different day. But she had tried to help me study a couple times, and that's when she had first started to kind of clue in on CaeRhae approaches this whole school, life, everything thing differently. And so when I really started to struggle, she asked me if she could share her professional opinion on what I was going through with me, because she tried to separate, those sides of herself, the psychologist, the clinician, and my friend, my godmom. And I said, yes, please, whatever helps. And she was like, I think you should really consider the possibility that you may have ADD. At the time, also, ADD still existed. Things in the ADHD, ADD world have changed rapidly over the last couple of years. So there, again, was still a distinction between ADD and ADHD. Now, again, I could be wrong, but my understanding is there's no longer a distinction. They're the same thing, same set of symptoms, same struggle. So she was like, I think you should consider whether or not you have ADD or ADHD. She's like, I'm not, I don't have it, but I work closely with a lot of young kids who do, and what you're struggling with and what you're going through does kind of hit all the marks, So she was like, why don't you go ahead and talk to your doctor about it, take some online, there are online quizzes to see if you match the criteria, and go from there. So I took 10 different online symptom tests, and every single one came out with highly likely, very probable, talk to your doctor. And so at the time I was on state healthcare. I went to my, at the time I still had a, what are they called? OB, Went to my OB. She referred me to a regular doctor. It took like 3 weeks to get into that regular like primary care physician. That primary care physician wasn't even, she's not a doctor. She's a RN, so she's a registered nurse. So it's not like she doesn't know things, but sorry. She's not like a full-on doctor, and she's not, even if she were a doctor, she's not a psychiatrist. So her thing was, she was like, well, there's this big book of symptoms that you have to fall into for any psychological disorder or diagnosis. You have to meet these symptoms. And she's like, and I'm not super well aware of the symptoms for ADHD or inattentive type ADHD, so I'm going to refer you out to a psychologist. I said, great, awesome. Ooh, I choked on my spit. What is the fastest that we can do that? And so she looks, and the soonest appointment was like 3 months out. And for someone who is really struggling in the way that I was struggling, that was so overwhelming. I cried that day. But I was like, whatever, at least someone is listening to me. At least someone hears me. At least what I am going through has been in some way validated. So the 3 months go by. I finally get this appointment. I get there, and it's not the regular psychologist I was supposed to see. It's another nurse. But a nurse who has practiced or studied in the field of psychology. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. I go in. It was honestly a horrible experience. She barely even looked at me, seemed very stunted socially, which is kind of ironic considering the circumstances and what her job was. I brought with me all the tests I had taken. She said she didn't want to see them. She asked a lot about my childhood, and then came out with, after like a 30-minute conversation, she just said, it sounds like you're really stressed right now and you should work on getting better sleep. I was gutted because she basically took everything I said and ignored it, because I had told her I've struggled with insomnia and gotten a diagnosis for insomnia when I was a very little kid, like literally like 8, 9 years old. I have struggled with my sleep my whole life. She literally said you should try melatonin. I've been on seriously heavy sleep medications before, definitely have tried melatonin. And it just felt like, sorry internet, but like such a half-assed response to someone who is genuinely struggling. And so she said all that, just sent me on my way. And I remember I just sat in the parking lot and I cried. I cried for like 45 minutes. I texted my godmom. I texted my mom, and my godmom, bless her soul, she never gave up on me. She just responded with, for most people, it takes like 4 or 5 conversations with different psychologists, psychiatrists, and doctors to get a diagnosis as an adult. And she's like, that's not to be discouraging. It's just the unfortunate reality in the system that we live in. So she suggested I call my doctor. And so I did. I was in tears. She was like, okay, like, no worries. Like, we are going to figure this out together. And just because this doctor or this nurse said no doesn't mean, she's like, I'm not treating it like a no. So we just need to find someone to diagnose you and move forward. And I was like, okay, cool. So we set up an appointment to go in and talk about next steps. That happened like the next week. She went ahead and like dug up all the information she could on diagnosis criteria. She had me bring in the tests that I took, and then she went ahead and diagnosed me with ADHD. So then we segued into, so just so you know, that whole time frame from like when I like started thinking about having, if I had ADHD to diagnosis, was actually a 6-month time frame. So I think I actually waited 4 months to see the psychologist, and then I didn't get an official diagnosis until a month and a half after. Yeah, because a week was too soon, because I remember getting into this doctor took a long time, because again, it's state healthcare. It's kind of hard to get an appointment. It was a free clinic. So she went ahead and diagnosed me. So then we started talking about medication. More backstory. When I was 19 years old, I went to a routine eye exam, and they found that I had swelling behind my eyes, which is usually indicative of either a tumor or a overproduction of spinal fluid. Both are not great. Both are scary. So at that time, I went through a procedure to get a spinal tap, to do some testing, got MRI imaging, blah, blah, blah. Results came up completely inconclusive. So fast forward to this doctor. She had looked at my medical history and said, I cannot with good conscience prescribe you stimulant medication, because even though we don't know what's causing the swelling behind your eyes, it's indicative of increased pressure increased intracranial pressure. And Adderall and Ritalin specifically can aggravate that pressure, and it can cause you to have a stroke, essentially. And she was like, so I can't give it to you until we know 100% beyond a shadow of a doubt that there's nothing going on with your intracranial pressure. So that was awesome. Again, I also cried about that, because when you've been fighting for so many years to survive on your own, and then you finally get a diagnosis, and then you're like, okay, I can take Adderall, I can take something that'll give me some semblance of relief, that'll help me get my shit together, and then you get told, but also no. Like, once again, no. After months of fighting for this, your solution that you thought you had, no. So that sucked. And then she said, well, we have this other medication called Wellbutrin. It's typically, I think, used to treat depression and anxiety, which outside of my postpartum depression, I do not have depression. It's not really something I struggle with. And I had anxiety when I had my kids, but outside of my children, anxiety is also not something that like really is a factor for me. She was like, so I'm not just like, she was very good to add, like, I'm not just pushing this at you because I think you actually just have anxiety and depression. She's like, this is something that off-brand through studies has been shown to work for some people with ADHD in terms of like enabling focus, fighting overwhelm, and kind of like getting things done. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna try it. It wasn't supposed to kick in for 2 weeks. And then it was supposed to last for anywhere from 6 to 9 months. And then she said, usually you either have to up the dosage after that or stop taking it for a little while and then start again. So again, not a long-term solution, really not that anything with ADHD is, but I was ready to give it a try. So I try it. I noticed an immediate difference. There was no 2-week time frame, which was weird because your body does have to adjust. But for me, it was not like that. It was like within a couple of days, I noticed a difference where I felt focused, I felt engaged, I felt really good. But then after 2 weeks, it completely stopped working. There was nothing. And so she upped my dosage, and again, but this time it was faster. It worked for like a week and a half, and then nothing. And so I told her, like, this isn't working. Do you have anything else? And her response was pretty much, we can keep looking, we can keep testing other drugs, or you can just try to manage it on your own with the knowledge that you have it, seeking resources online from other doctors, etc. So I decided to go that route just because if you have ADHD, you know the stress of getting doctor's appointments, going to those doctor's appointments, following through on what those doctors say, in and of itself is a whole process. So I was like, listen, it's already taken so much of me to even get to these appointments that I just think it's better off if I, with this knowledge, move forward and try and handle things on my own. So all that being said, I did a lot of trial and error. I watched a lot of TikToks and YouTubes and read a lot of articles, and kind of started to find a rhythm for myself, figure out tips and tricks for what worked for me and with motherhood, with my kids, with trying to maintain a household, with working a job. I finally felt like I was starting to like get a grip in the fall of this year. So almost a year and a half after diagnosis. which is a long time. It's a long time to struggle if you consider how much I was struggling even before diagnosis. So from the time my ADHD really peaked, like 3 months after my daughter was born, to now, it's been almost a 3-year process of getting a grip. And that is a long time, and it's super daunting. And I don't want to intimidate anyone, but my hope is that you've landed in the right place, because I've done all the testing for us. So I do hope to share a lot of tips and tricks on here. Do a lot of individual videos on just methods that I have found that work, methods I've tried that don't work, and how I just have figured out how to manage myself and manage a household, manage a budget, which is scary, going forward as an adult with ADHD. So that's my story. That's how I got diagnosed. My biggest advice initially is, if you're trying to get a diagnosis, don't give up. You're not alone. And even though it feels like you keep getting knocked down and you keep getting told no, or you keep missing doctor's appointments, or you haven't even worked up the courage or the focus to make that initial phone call, just try, just keep going, because it is hard and it does suck. And no one, I understand it's so much harder than anyone who's like neurotypical will ever understand, but you can do this. And then my tip, once you know that you have it, is something that worked yesterday may not work today, and something that worked today may not work tomorrow. So all these tips and tricks I'm going to try and give you guys, I honestly just like look in my bag, my hat of tricks every single day, and I'm like, okay, let's try this one. An hour or two into the day, it's not working. I'm sitting on the couch, I'm zoning out, I feel overwhelmed, I feel like I can't do it. I have to pick something else. I have to try something else. So you just cannot give up on yourself. You cannot give in to the overwhelm. You have to catch it before it gets you. So honestly, it's exhausting and it feels like a lot of work, because it is a lot of work. But I want you to know that you and your life and your story and your potential and your purpose are worth the work to get a handle on your mental health and your ADHD. ADHD can be a superpower. And so let's learn to work with it instead of against it. Because then, I don't know, ADHD gives you wings. So anyways, that's my story. That's me, myself, and ADHD. And I look forward to having you guys visit my channel in the future. If this is a video that you liked and you want to see more, go ahead and give this a thumbs up and subscribe. And I will see you guys in my next video.